Hey everyone, welcome back to class. Okay, so today there is another guest workshop that I'm bringing you from my very good friend and longtime collaborator. He's also my LP, Conrad Wadowski. I think we've known each other for maybe a couple of years. We got connected
Yeah.
back when I was still at Andreessen Horowitz, and Conrad is the co-founder of Teachable, which is now one of the largest companies in the passion economy working in the online education space. And so Conrad was one of the original co-founders, led growth there for a long time. He was also the most highly rated instructor at General Assembly in New York,
Well,
teaching about growth and growth for startups and technology businesses. So the backstory of this guest workshop is that initially I was planning to teach this topic myself. I was planning to teach about the cold start problem, creator growth loops, how to get distribution for creator products. And then I talked to Conrad one day and I was like, wait, actually, you should teach this because you've done it. And I'm just an outside observer, like looking from the outside in at companies and trying to approximate like how they've grown, but like you've been on the inside and have actually grown one of the toughest creator products in my opinion to grow, which has like a really long activation funnel and like really high creator effort to use. And so you are the perfect instructor for this particular workshop and you should just teach it. And so that is how we are here today. So Conrad has prepped a really amazing workshop all about growing creator products, identifying an initial beachhead, target customer users, also about finding product market fit. So I'm really excited about this. And oh, by the way, before we get started, Conrad is building another company now and looking to hire engineering talent. So if you are looking to work with a really credible repeat founder, hit him up. Um, I can introduce you guys too if you just
totally,
DM me. I just invited him to the Slack as well.
totally.
So yeah, keep that in mind. And he also angel invests, lots of things.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I really appreciate that intro, Lee. Yeah, just excited to teach this and kind of just walk through some of the experiences that I've had and even just some of the mistakes. I think there's some things that we got right with Teachable, but I think that as the creator economy grows and as there's more opportunities, there's, a lot of things that we could learn from. Um, so yeah, I think the thing that I'm really passionate about, and just to kind of start off with, is just this transition of individuals turning into business owners. I think that's really what excites me about this category, and hopefully that's kind of the thing that excites you guys. I bring that up because we kind of have the decision to work on anything we want to. We can work on climate change. We can work on um, other types of engineering. And so I think we're just in a really interesting point in time, and I think this is a really great topic to be investing your time into and building expertise in. Um, and the thing is that we're doing something great. This isn't sort of like building a SaaS company. There's nothing wrong with building a SaaS company like on its own. But a typical SaaS company, you're kind of helping people, the rich get richer. And in this case, what you're doing is you're helping create a more independent economy, and you're helping people earn money on their own and get to opportunities they otherwise would not have. So just kind of as I reflect and kind of after Teachable, think about other things to do, this is kind of what's really brought me back to this category, and I'm kind of just excited to see all the energy that Lee's created around this course and around the passion economy just in general. So quick background on me. Currently an active investor and builder in the creator economy. Previously, I was the co-founder of Teachable, where I led growth and started something about 8 years ago called GrowHack, where I was a creator myself. And I can talk really quickly about what happened there. GrowHack was a blog that we started out in New York, and it's kind of something you'd similarly see with like the Substacks, but I had to kind of put it all together myself. And Teachable actually came as a way to monetize my email list. And what I ended up doing was creating these boot camps and courses. And that just ended up being a much more sustainable kind of business model instead of doing the consulting work that I was doing in New York at the time. I think it's really helpful to kind of think about, that kind of transition from being a creator to starting a platform. And so if you haven't been a creator on your own, that's something to consider is kind of working very closely with creators to get a lot of empathy for the creators. So agenda for today, just really quick to start off, is challenges and opportunities in building for the creator economy. I think there's both sides, and I think you have to think about both things before going in, or kind of whatever stage you're in right now. And then the real meat of this is going to be about thinking about a really key advantage to building for the creator economy, which is this creator growth loop. And I think that the sooner that you think about this and build it into your business model, I think the more successful you're going to be. We sort of stumbled into this, probably a year and a half into working on Teachable. And it was only until then that we were able to really grow. And in our situation, it was a period of about 18 months where we were growing revenue 20 to 30 to 40% month on month. And so you can see that, like, once you kind of got this part dialed in, it starts to get a lot easier to build this type of business. At the very end, we'll talk a little bit about the cold start problem as well, which is, how do you go from kind of zero to something, and take it from there. So yeah, when we started Teachable in 2013, we ran into a couple challenges that a lot of creator businesses face. And here's some things that you might relate to. And maybe type into chat if you can connect with any of these things as you're kind of thinking about your business. But generally speaking, low LTV. A typical creator, you're making about $1,000 a year on a creator. At least that's what we were doing. For a lot of other businesses, it's something similar. So you're not really monetizing that creator too much. The other challenge is that creators often want kind of one-on-one, kind of personalized onboarding, and so what that ends up doing is really giving you a CAC that might even be more than your LTV. So that could be sort of an unsustainable business model, right? If your LTV is lower than your CAC, how are you supposed to be in business? The last part of this, and this is kind of pretty crazy, but it's also payback period. At least in the case of Teachable, it would take us 3 to 12 months for a new user who is interested in using Teachable to actually be engaged. So it can actually take some time for somebody to create the content and then to start monetizing the content, because this is a new business. And last thing is just high competition. And this is kind of something I've talked to a couple people starting, these businesses now, is thinking like, oh, there's so many different types of competitors here. That was the case actually back then. The way that we were looking at competitors was WordPress, kind of these WordPress plugins at the time. And so things have kind of evolved, but there's always been kind of competition in this category. But, I think that it's helpful to look at the opportunities in the space. So one thing that's really cool about working with creators is creators are early adopters. They're going to be the people that are in their social group on the distribution curve, that are going to be the people that are recommending things. They're going to be talking about things. They're going to be testing things out so they can share it with other people. It's also a growing market. That's kind of one thing Lee talks, quite a bit about. And I think we're still really early days in terms of the size of the market. And one way to look at that, I like to look at this, is like thinking about Shopify, where Shopify was, let's say, 10 years ago, is approximately where we are right now with the creator economy. The last thing, or another point, is counter positioning. So right now, at least in this kind of unique moment in time, we have all these platforms. We have YouTube, we have Twitch, all these platforms that are growing very fast, but they're really focused on ad revenue. So, it's better for their business model right now to focus on that. So that leaves a really big opportunity for other providers to come in, maybe people that are on this call, and help with monetization with the kind of long tail of creators, for example. And the last thing that I get distracted in the chat. Last thing is kind of word of mouth. And this is really the key part that we're going to be focusing on for the rest of the presentation, which is, how to think about word of mouth with creators. And the way I think about it is that creators are the highest word of mouth kind of persona or segment in existence. Normal word of mouth, when you think about virality and how like products spread, is something like, you bring on 4 users to your app, and then it leads to like 1 additional user. And maybe you can do, you can have a really great product and maybe, you know, it becomes a little bit viral and like 4 users end up being 4 users, right? But typically, like for SaaS products, that's kind of what you're seeing. Now, a creative word of mouth is a little bit different. You can acquire one creator, and that one creator can lead to thousands of new additional users or creators. And so, you know, typically when we kind of think about this creator lifetime value, let's say you value a creator at $5,000, like the creator that's actually on your platform, you think, okay, you know, over time, you know, that creator, that individual creator is going to be worth 5,000. But the way that you should really be thinking about it in terms of the way that you acquire that user and in terms of the real lifetime value of that user is not just that $5,000, but it's the, let's say, $5 million that creator is referring into your product. So this is in the form of other users that they either recommend or, you know, bring into your product. So the LTVs of certain types of creators in your product can actually be very, very high, and dramatically change the way that your business model looks like. The other part of this is not just like sort of the reach that a creator has, but it's also the way that, you know, creators are experts at convincing other people. You know, once you're really good at content, what you're really good at is, you know, you have some expertise and you have an authenticity when you're creating a message. The messages that you're going to be giving to, you know, your tribe are going to be more rich. They're going to be stronger. The receivers, you know, of those messages are going to, you know, be more engaged because they've heard some of your messages in the past. And typically, when you look at these types of communities that the creators develop, there's also a lot of affinity that they naturally have with the receiver. And so what this means is not only do the creators have access to a large group of people, but they also have a lot of influence with that group of people. And a final point to this side of things is just that this idea of word of mouth is just getting more and more powerful. So Apple and Google right now, and you can kind of go into some of the details around what's exactly happening, but they're increasing, they're basically dropping some of the things that you can do in terms of attribution. So if you're a marketer and you want to know exactly how things are converting in your funnel, there's going to be some new restrictions that are coming out actually right now. And so what that's going to do is it's going to change marketing a bit so it's more reliant on a marketing mix and not just direct revenue attribution. And so that means that creators are just going to be more and more important. And so if you can crack this thing, if you can crack this kind of creator growth loop, which I think, you know, every business that's in this category should try to figure out, it could completely change your business from high CAC, you know, to low CAC, from low LTV to high LTV, and then ultimately build a scalable business. And so Teachable was acquired by Hotmart for $250 million last year. And, you know, although it was acquired, you know, there's other companies such as Hotmart, which acquired us, who were able to do things that we didn't do. And so there's a lot of kind of things that we learned kind of along the way before that acquisition. So how do you actually harness this kind of creator word of mouth? And I think this tweet from Andrew Chen is great. I think this is the first time I've heard the kind of the concept of, you know, of this like being spoken by somebody else, which is pretty cool when you start seeing, you know, people start to hype this category because, you know, when we started the business, you know, there wasn't any hype at all. But the creator-driven growth loop works like this. Creators are incentivized to prominently link to the platform, it's their core business. The consumers sign up and sometimes are creators themselves, and there's an accumulated advantage over time in terms of subscribers and followers. So this is kind of the way that I look at it. There's kind of the creator growth loop is when you leverage the word of mouth of one type of creator to help you grow. We'll go into that in a second, but basically there's 4 steps to it. There's the niche, there's activation, referral, and acquisition. So that just kind of went through. That's interesting. It's automatically going through right now. Oh no. Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go like this, and I'm just gonna scroll through because it looks like there's some sort of animation. We're just gonna deal with it. So let's do this. Okay, cool. So a niche, and this is like a really key component to doing this, which is choosing a high word of mouth creator segment. It's very tempting for a lot of people when they're thinking about their creator growth loop to not do this, and we'll go into more of that. Activation, this is getting the creators activated by solving a high impact problem for them. Referral, this is when the creator shares you with their audience. And then there's acquisition, which is some of that creator's audience converts to new users. And finally, this is how the whole loop goes around and around. Once you acquire those users also activate other users, and then the process starts over again. So let's see this in action with YouTube. And it was kind of cool to actually look back into the day of how all this stuff worked with YouTube. But YouTube's initial Dave McClure, yes, we were inspired with the R metrics from Dave McClure here. But so there's kind of a few steps here. So on YouTube, one of their initial high word of mouth segments was actually indie bands on MySpace. And this is something I didn't really know until I started digging into it. But that was actually something that the creators chose at the very beginning. And what they did is that they gave they solved a high impact problem for these indie creators, these indie musicians, and gave them a free solution to embed video on their MySpace pages. And they just made it really easy to embed. Let's go to the next step here. So they were able to easily embed, and then what happened is that other MySpace people and musicians would see what was going on, and then they would start to do it themselves. And that would just lead to and that ended up leading to a lot of acquisition for YouTube. And this is kind of an interview that I pulled up, but the COO of MySpace attributed 60% of users of YouTube's traffic to MySpace, which is pretty insane. And then eventually YouTube, and if you think about YouTube today, it's the place for creators, and YouTube has its own accumulated advantage of other creators that have joined the platform. So I'm going to try and play this right now. Let's see if that works for me. Okay, so now we're going to go into, that didn't work. Okay, that's fine. So, so there's a couple challenges though. So it seems very simple, right? Like you have this loop, like, okay, cool. But there's actually a few challenges as you're designing this thing up front to think about. The first one is making sure that you're actually focusing on a high word of mouth beachhead. Modular design, actually solving a high impact problem, because a lot of products that I see are not solving a problem. It's very kind of low impact, unfortunately. The time to market, and then decreasing lag time, which we'll get into. So the first thing is just focusing on a high word of mouth beachhead. And kind of the way that I think about it is like, let's say that you want to build, let's see if I can play this right now. So the best way to explain this is with this snowball analogy, right? So if you ever packed a snowball, it takes some time to pack together. And if you want to create a really big snowball, doing this gets especially hard to do. And so to create a huge snowball, you spend some time packing a small snowball up front. And then once it's packed right, you can start to just roll it down the hill. Until eventually it turns into something like this monstrosity, right? This is a pretty cool video. Look at this. This lady just like flipped right over it. Okay, so your beachhead is basically this. It's you selecting your best bet on one single high word of mouth segment. And this is where it takes some judgment, right? You have to choose that segment. But this is where, I think I see a lot of platforms just try and take in whatever type of creator they can to use their product, instead of actually being very intentional about who they're designing for. So what you're doing is you're starting with one place, and then once you started with that wedge, you then spread out into adjacent segments. This is as opposed to that process of something that is very common, which is scattering your efforts and therefore just decreasing your momentum. So, one way that you can look at this is, our beachhead at Teachable initially was coding course creators. And so there's one approach where, we could, get very specific types of course creators, or we can sort of expand to, let's say, YouTubers or, TikTokers, for example. So once you go into a specific beachhead, that's when you can start to better think about what your next steps are. It does help though at the same time, and we'll kind of go into this, just thinking about what you think those next steps are. And that has a lot of implications for the type of product you build and things like that. So without a customer beachhead, this is kind of what you might end up with. So you're a platform and you say, hey, cool, I've got 3 great creators. These people are doing awesome things. I've got a YouTuber, I've got a coding course creator, and I've got a TikToker. But then what ends up happening is they all kind of want different things. They want an integration with this platform or that platform. And then that, and let's say that YouTuber brings on somebody else and that course creator brings on someone else. Now you've got an ever expanding problem that might be taking you in the wrong direction. And so, a better process is this process of finding the beachhead and then finding lookalike creators. And so this is kind of an example of Teachable and how we did it. But
can I just interrupt with a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is an interesting issue that I think a lot of really early stage creator companies deal with. Is they have a product that is like pretty horizontal. It can be used by lots of different creator segments. And they're not really prescriptive. They kind of want to show growth or, see who should be their target segment. And so they go after all of them, acquire all of them. They're all using the platform.
Yep.
And so they get pulled in lots of different directions and they're not sure exactly where to focus. So how do you even identify what the beachhead should be in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there's a couple requirements that I think about. One is, what you're actually trying to build towards at the end of the day. I think, in choosing the right beachhead, I think one of the best things that I've done in the past is just getting to know. And so before we started Teachable, I was a creator myself, and I got to know all these other types of creators. So these are all like my friends, right? Like I sort of knew like this persona and that persona. I sort of understood the maze of like the different personas that exist in the category. And so it became much easier for me to say, okay, we're actually designing for this persona, and then eventually we'll move on to another one. It gets harder for a new founder that's coming into the category because they don't necessarily have that feel yet because they haven't met all those different types of people. And usually, and this is going to be part of the presentation too, is actually just getting you guys to just talk to a certain number of creators, even to the point of something like 20 per week. And then actually just being friends with the creators. So if you don't have that sort of like network to start off with, then actually just, making friends with them and just like being really well connected with them, I think is a way for you to better relate. Because the other thing is that they're very kind of honest, like, will they use this or not? So I think that one thing that is helpful is having that understanding and kind of empathy for the creator, and then using that as a place for you to start when you're making your selection process. And so we're going to go into a little bit more about, how to select that as well. But that's kind of like the quick answer to start.
Cool. Thanks.
And so, yeah, and this strategy of finding this one type of creator is very powerful. On Facebook, if you upload a lookalike audience to Facebook, for example, Facebook will find other similar people. And it turns out that the message that you use with one segment ends up resonating with another segment. And so you're able to build this kind of snowball because you're focusing. But when you don't focus, it's just much harder to build that kind of snowball. And what this does, it takes you from unfocused to strategic. I think we just, maybe answered a question right now. Should there be anything else? Should I answer maybe another question? Do you think there's anything else?
There's a question in the chat about how do you measure word of mouth?
So one of the links that, so this is very, very hard. And it's, if not impossible. There's a link that we included in the, the pre-reading called the word of mouth coefficient. And Reforge talks about this, and there's some kind of discussion about it. I wouldn't think too much about it, to be honest. I think the big thing that you're really looking for is finding a creator that has a large audience. And maybe finding the creator that has the largest audience that you can have access to. So like if you're buddy with Mr. Beast, then that's really helpful. Or you could, if you don't have access to someone like a Mr. Beast, none of us really do, you find someone that has a really big audience that you can at least help in some way. So I think that's maybe, one initial answer to that at least.
Yep, definitely. There's another question about, should you focus on the personas you already know and understand really well for your vertical beachhead? And how does this relate to the idea of founder market fit?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In some ways I can think of Teachable as having a lot of founder market fit. But on the other hand, I think we also prematurely optimized for, me basically as the persona. So Teachable is sort of built around my use case of like, I have an email list and I'm going to try and monetize the email list with courses. Could there have been other segments that we could have gone after? Yes. Would we have gotten as much traction as quickly? Probably not. From a macro optimization perspective, probably worse. But from a micro optimization perspective, and if you think about, the outcome of Teachable, Teachable is going to end up becoming what it is as Teachable. Could there have been something better? Probably. So if we had basically done a little bit more work up front, we probably could have found a different segment to go after. But maybe Teachable would have never existed. And so I think it's a tough question to answer, because I think you kind of go either way. But from a founder market fit perspective, it's probably better.
Yeah, it's always good to be solving your own problems.
It's much easier. It's much easier, and you might end up kind of eventually going into like the biggest part of the market. So it sort of depends on depends on a few things. I think that the more you know upfront, the better you're going to be.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Gunjan Kejriwal. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, thanks, Lynn. Hi, Conrad. Great to be listening to you. Have been following Teachable and the amazing work that you guys have done at Teachable. Yeah. Myself, building a platform for teachers, helping them build their courses. And the question that I've asked is something very, very relevant to us and how we are looking at what we are building. So very simple question, Conrad, how do you think about building for creators? How do you think about whether you build a one-sided platform or a two-sided platform? For example, do you build Teachable? What's the impact of, say, building Teachable with or without discovery, right? So want to understand from your past experience of building Teachable and how do you look at it now? Do you think the dynamics would have been different if you started it out as a discovery, as a platform which enabled discovery for creators as well?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And it's funny because how it started with us was as courses on Udemy. So initially the kind of courses that we were developing were on Udemy, and we were sort of the growth course that was sort of the number one on Udemy. And Teachable kind of came out as a solution to our own problem around that, because even though we were sort of the top course at the time for what we were doing, we were making at a maximum 5,000 a month, despite having thousands of students come into the course. And what we would notice is Udemy would cross promote other types of courses to the students that we would acquire. And then there were some constraints around how much we could charge. And then we didn't have ownership over the list. And so I say this because Teachable in some ways was a reaction against that, is to say, okay, cool. There's this environment here that's very Amazon-like, and we don't have any control. Let's actually go to a place where we do have control. And so the discovery problem, if you can solve it for people, it's great. But the tendency is that you're going to have to charge a really high rate. At least that's what Udemy had to do. So they were taking 30% at the time. I think they might have changed that or increased that over time. So I think a lot of creators, at least at that time, were thinking that's a really, that's a lot to charge. I want to see if I can do this on my own. And the initial Teachable users, on Udemy, 8 of the top 10 Udemy instructors ended up kind of moving on to Teachable or another product like Teachable. And so it was just because, once you get to a certain size, you can create your own platform. And so there's just kind of a natural force where, people that are creating content are going to want to eventually own their own business. I tend to think that that's the way that a lot of the newer platforms are going to come out, where it's going to be more about optimizing for the creator and what the creator wants versus optimizing for the platform. And if you can't make that much in terms of a rake, and you're still solving the discovery problem, that might not also be a sustainable business. So it's just something to think about. It's hard to do lead gen, at scale. And lead gen for me is a lead that's taken away from somebody else. And so you tend to optimize for certain creators that are on the platform. And if you're not one of those creators, or you're not happy as a creator, you're going to want to take your business somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely would have some points to add there. For example, and I would go ahead, if Lee agrees, if it's all right, I would go ahead and ask a few follow-up questions.
Sure.
How about you ask them in the chat, in the Slack, and then people can upvote on them. If I can just piggyback off of Conrad's answer there, I think there's always, for marketplaces, there's always going to be like a graduation problem with the top supply side, with the top suppliers on a marketplace, and people will be tempted to go off and like create their own thing and benefit from lower take rates and like capture more of the upside if they have built like a loyal customer base themselves. So I think like the two business models, that's not to say one is better than the other, but I think there's a different creator segmentation or a different provider segmentation that both business models are going after and addressing. And I think through the launch of the Teachable Discover experience, which is the two-sided marketplace, the marketplace is more appealing to the long tail of creators, whereas the SaaS business is more appealing to the top tier of creators.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because despite those efforts, I don't think that, from what at least I understand right now, and I'm not the business day to day, but they don't create that much impact. So it's kind of like, it's a nice thing to have for the creator. Sort of, there's some leads that are being generated, but at least on Teachable side, and this is just the experience for Teachable, so maybe someone else can solve it. It doesn't really generate too much revenue for Teachable or for the creators. So there's kind of attempts to kind of create more of a discovery experience, and kind of the same way you see like Shopify, have their own app and try to do some discovery. But it's still pretty hard.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because with a course, there tends to be, especially as you look at these, like specifically the Teachable, the sales process for these courses ends up being pretty lengthy. And there tends to be multiple stages. So at least for kind of course creators, there could be multiple steps to a sales process, and that's really hard to do in a marketplace where you're just sending out one email, let's say, versus a course where you might have to actually have multiple touch points before you sell a multi-$1,000 course, compared to like a $10 course on Udemy or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's something else to look at.
Yep. Let's go to Gil next, and then after this, we'll save more questions for later.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. This is a two-parter. So I'm just reading what I wrote. Are you finding that beachheads now involve giving equity to creators who might accelerate growth? And at what point do you decide to stop giving equity to influential creators who sign up?
Yeah, the equity question is an interesting one. I think if you are, I think it is a best practice to offer some equity to an initial segment of creators, right? But I do think that there's an education problem where creators expect a lot more equity than is reasonable. And so if you're able to get past that education problem and come up with something that's reasonable, because a lot of creators don't understand kind of like startup economics, then I think that it could make a lot of sense. So I think that we're going to see more and more of that. I think we're going to see more creators kind of investing or being investors in some of these startups. So it's definitely something to consider. I think that's maybe the short answer to that. I think I can kind of go longer than that. Were you considering kind of raising around or raising money from creators, or would you consider making them advisors?
Sorry, this isn't really specific to me and my needs right now. It's just something that I see a lot of entrepreneurs talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah, it's interesting seeing who's becoming an investor in some of these creator-led companies. Like you see Casey's name a lot, you see Josh Richards a lot.
I think there's an opportunity to build like an incubator type thing where you pair a creator who has massive distribution with like an operator, a company builder, and they co-create something that is like very aligned with the creator's brand, but like it's paired with someone who actually knows how to build product. And I think that could be like a really fruitful model for company building and for investing. I think, yeah, what you're talking about where like there's a startup, they need to get initial distribution. So they try to go to creators and pitch them on like coming on as advisors and helping market the product. I think that's a bit more challenging because, yeah, to Conrad's point, I've seen creators ask for like literally 40% of the business because they feel like they are the make or break of the whole startup. And 40%, like you would never usually sell 40% of the business even to an investor in a single round. So I think there's a mismatch of expectations and like giving them the typical advisory level number of shares just seems like really, really small to them. But I think an interesting path is that incubator model that I mentioned.
That's a great point.
Cool. Shall we continue?
Let's keep going. So the next thing is just kind of modular design. And I'll kind of just mention this point briefly, but, and this is the question to you guys is, if you were to start off as a Teachable or a Circle, and so, if you're not familiar with Circle, type it in. So it's circle.so. Circle is kind of a platform that focuses on community, and Teachable is a platform that focuses on courses. If you were to choose one of these places to start your business, your creator business, which one would you start? So I want you guys to just type this into chat. I'm seeing a lot of circles, which is good. Okay, cool. Square. Cool. So yeah, that's exactly it. One of the things that did happen with Teachable was there's not a lot of places that you can go. You end up having to really optimize towards one type of use case, and a creator, has many ways that they could be generating revenue. And so right now, I think Teachable has launched kind of coaching, they're kind of like some services component. But the interesting thing with Circle is you can see things like not only coaching, twice there, but you have courses, you have e-commerce, you have all other types of use cases for a community. And so, especially as we talk about kind of building and finding that kind of beachhead, I think it's a matter of being thoughtful, both of how vertical you're going, but also how deep you want to go into a specific vertical. So, I think that a company like Circle is going to be much, much better positioned to be a really large company compared to something like Teachable because of that reason. And so as you're kind of thinking about your products and things like that, that's just also something I would kind of throw in there. The third thing is just going to be solving a high impact problem. And I know that Lee kind of talked about this in some of the earlier presentations. And I think it was framed in kind of a pretty similar way, which is just this kind of hierarchy of goals that creators have. At the very bottom, it's kind of, creating content, and then it's audience growth and engagement, and then it's monetization. And, if you're not focused on one of these three goals, and you're building something like a CRM, or you're building an analytics tool, or you're building something like that, and there's not a very specific way it's going to tie into one of these things, it's going to be really hard to get a creator's attention. And so from a solution perspective, that's something to think about is how do you, whatever type of solution you're thinking about, how does that tie into one of those major goals that the creator has? And so let's actually take a look at kind of a growth loop from a content perspective. And so, I think that, okay, so we're just gonna have to go through this. So what we're gonna do is actually go through a couple different growth loops and just use this as an example before we do an exercise together and create our own growth loops. And so this is an example of a content creation growth loop with Canva. And maybe not all of us think about Canva as being a kind of a creator economy company, but it absolutely is. And the people that are using Canva, and Canva's also a very fast growing company, they're doing quite well. And so, as an example, let's say that we wanted to choose a high word of mouth segment, and we're Canva. What we could do is we could go after Latin American digital business coaching YouTubers. And I don't know if Canva's doing this, and from what I can see, they potentially are. But there's easy ways that you can filter and find business coaching YouTubers. Once you find that niche, and once you've identified that niche, you can then start to say, okay, well, what's that niche's actual problem as it relates to their content? And if you talk to a lot of YouTubers, the big thing that they're going to bring up is going to be high CTR thumbnails. So a lot of these people are hiring consultants to actually create the thumbnails for them. So what if you as Canva can create templates that are, let's say, optimized in Spanish for for these creators? And the cool thing about templates, especially when we think about scalability, is that you can create some templates for a specific type of creator, and then you can actually just spit out templates for like 10 other types of creators. So it's a really great place to, it's kind of like one of those kind of growth loops that is more or less scalable. What Canva does right now, and this is a big part of their process, is they use affiliate links. So they use something called impact.com, and Impact will actually pay out 20 to 75% of sales. So if you do actually, share this with your audience, you're going to get compensated for it. And then that leads to, and then the last step of this, and kind of optimizing that third step, which is once somebody comes onto your website, what landing page are they landing on? So in this case, it's a landing page that's more or less tailored. If we were really to focus on that example of LATAM business coaching YouTubers, maybe what Canva could have done is they could have made this in Spanish, for example, and that would have been a much better optimization. And then over time, you just end up acquiring, these users. They end up creating more content, and that just creates more and more referrals that are coming back to Canva. The next example that I kind of want to mention is just about YouTube. And this is going to be something that we're starting to see the larger, platforms do and get really competitive on. And so it's something to actually just be thoughtful of, because these larger platforms are putting a lot of money into acquiring YouTubers. So let's kind of walk through like an example of how that looks like right now, and what YouTube is doing. So let's say that we're YouTube. What we could do is say focus on gamers on YouTube. And from the outside, again, and I'm just kind of like looking from the outside in, it looks like they've actually chosen one of these beachheads of gamers on YouTube. And what they're doing is they're hiring a bunch of people to create really high-touch relationships with these YouTubers. And then they're setting up deals with YouTubers. So PewDiePie, for example, signed an exclusive deal with YouTube, and which basically took him off of Twitch, which is kind of a competing channel, or competing aggregator. And so what that does is it helps inspire the next, and this is just a video I pulled up, it helps inspire the next generation of people that want to start their gaming channel, because they're kind of looking at PewDiePie, who's I think the largest YouTuber, if not maybe number 2 or something. And so it helps inspire sort of the next generation of creators. And if you can tell, like, what it does is it creates an accumulated advantage. So one thing that pretty recently happened was Microsoft tried to start a competing platform called Mixer. They paid another gaming creator rumored between $20 and $30 million, and that whole project failed. They weren't able to kind of switch Ninja over to Mixer. It's tough to know exactly why, so I just don't have intel on that, but it kind of gives you a sense of like how powerful some of these kind of deals can be, and once you get these creators, how powerful that can be. And so
to quickly
yeah,
interrupt you there.
yeah,
So for the Ninja mixer
yeah,
example, so basically they tried to create a loop. Like they tried to create the loop that you had outlined, that
mhm,
Andrew Chen had outlined, the creator growth loop.
yeah,
They were successful in poaching Ninja to
right,
Mixer, but where they failed, I guess, was um, like after that initial acquisition, they couldn't get like Ninja to bring on other like creators onto the platform. So somewhere between, I guess, from acquiring to activation
yeah,
is where it broke down, would you say?
hmm yeah. So it looks like they activated him, but they couldn't get him to refer. So
Right.
he sort of came on and said, cool, yeah, I'll do this for 30 mil. Like, that's cool for me. And then when it came to actually sharing with his audience or actually getting other people from his audience in, or other creators that are like him, yeah, maybe that's where it broke down.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
This is also, yeah, it's also reminiscent of Snap Spotlight and the
mm,
program to pay $1 million a year to folks who are posting on the Spotlight tab
yeah,
of Snapchat.
mhm,
Like, obviously, the $1 million a day is very active. I mean, it's very effective for acquiring creators. There's a lot of videos now being posted to that tab. So I guess that means creators are being activated,
mhm,
but the unknown is whether they're referring their users there to become future creators.
right, right. And, and yeah, and that's a great question. It's like something that we just don't have intel into, and like to try to see what's happening. There is going to be one of these effects that's happening, but we just don't know how pronounced it is without looking at their analytics or anything like that.
Alex, if he's on the call, should give us the inside intel.
Ooh, I like that.
Okay. You don't have to.
He doesn't have to. Yeah. So yeah, and then this kind of brings us back to Teachable and sort of what we were doing, and the problem that we were really solving with Teachable was bringing in creators from, like, initially it started was just focusing on Udemy, just because of the deal and the way it was set up on Udemy. It was so disadvantageous to the creators. Udemy basically educated the creators that, hey, this is a way that I can make money online. And once those creators realized that they could do that, then they started to say, hey, how can I actually do this myself? That was the initial problem that we were solving. One of the challenges of that is that was only a small period of time. And, if like, we can even call that a month in terms of like time frame. So after that first month, then what do you do? So we had an initial bump of users. We had, a few users come in, but how do we actually make that process repeatable? And that was really the kind of the struggle that we had at Teachable. And what we eventually realized that, and I'm curious, with you guys as you're thinking about your businesses, is finding that one high word of mouth creator segment that's going to actually refer other types of users. And so we ended up building a whole entire program around a specific type of creator. And so at first we kind of experimented with a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll just kind of give you one experiment was, I was reaching out to actually YouTubers. So I was like, okay, look, these guys have huge audiences. Let's see if I can just like sell YouTubers on Teachable. So I got 3 YouTubers. They all agreed to create a course. They created the course. But what was so funny is when we structured the course for the YouTubers, the thing that came out was that the YouTubers just didn't have enough time to actually go in and structure the content in the way that you traditionally see with the course. The YouTubers were so focused on developing content for YouTube that they didn't really understand, it didn't really connect with this idea of creating a course. Patreon, on the other hand, was a platform that was almost perfectly designed for that YouTuber. Patreon actually had less features than we did, and it was just so optimized towards the YouTuber because the YouTuber didn't want these additional features that we were providing. And so what we discovered was that really what we were doing was optimizing towards people with email lists, and other platforms like Patreon were optimizing towards a source of users, which was, people on YouTube. And so, I think that's just kind of like an important thing to say is like, okay, so then once we realized, okay, we're actually focusing on people with email lists, from the people that had email lists, we realized there's one specific type of user. And this is a small percentage of like all the users that are possibly out there, but it's a segment of these course creation experts. And so one example is Mariah Cause, Danielle Leslie, these types of creators that they were actually doing the hard work of acquiring customers themselves and teaching other people how to create courses. So if I'm teaching an audience of 10,000 people how to create courses, if I'm able to acquire that person, that's going to have a lot of impact for Teachable versus Teachable going out and acquiring those 10,000 users yourselves. And so we ended up creating a whole bunch of very specific programs tailored towards these types of creators. And a lot of these processes that we created for these creators ended up actually being pretty high touch. So typically when you see, a lot of programs, you might see it just being completely productized. But the thing that had the most impact for us was actually going out and building direct relationships with these really, these awesome course creators that had huge audiences, and then building ways for them to make additional money. So one of the ways that we activated these users, because they didn't really want to deal with us, they're like, who are these Teachable guys? Like, why are they reaching out to me? So what we would do to activate them is we'd invite them as speakers to an online event. And these were called Teachable Summits. And we had different types of events. We had webinars that were kind of one-off events, and then we had these like summits. And the summits were probably the best thing that we did for activation, where we could go and we could activate 10 other creators that had access to their own like huge audiences of, let's say, 20 to 50 to 100,000. And what we would do is we would get them to promote to their audience. We would package and bundle a bunch of their content, and at the very end of the summit, we would sell all that content at once. And by bringing all these creators together, we had a more compelling offer that what ended up being hundreds of thousands of people that are joining these summits would end up doing. And so that was actually the really big thing that we ended up doing at Teachable, and that's how we applied our own creator loop, is going after this type of approach. The refer part of this process is that 50% of the revenue that was generated in these courses we would give back to the creators who promoted this, and we would have affiliate codes that the creators who would promote would send to their audiences, and so we'd be able to track and see how many people are actually coming in. There's and just to give you an example, from one of these joint webinars with only one single creator, we were able to generate over $100,000. And so half of that would end up going to the creator, but half of it would go to us. And that would end up getting a whole bunch of people to be pre-committed to using Teachable. There's a link here that I'm just going to put into chat. Let's see if I can figure this out actually, because it's all right, okay, so I'll send this in Slack, but it basically goes through a sequence of 8 different types of like programs that we created with these different creators to help them better monetize. And over time, this process of us doing this, so there's a couple other companies that started like just after Teachable. So one's called, I think, Podia, for example. And they just didn't do these types of programs. They didn't do anything like this. They just said, hey, we're just going to focus on product. We definitely focused on product, but they didn't kind of develop these types of programs. And from our best estimates, they were basically 1/10 of the size of Teachable. And so, really focusing and understanding your creator growth loop, I think, is going to have a lot of impact, for your business.
A quick question there.
Yeah.
So creator growth loop, I've heard it being sort of discussed in 2 separate ways. Casey Winters wrote a blog post about the creator growth loop where he described it as for the referral piece, it's like creators' audiences are comprised of potential future creators. And so when a creator is distributing, say, their Substack newsletter to their reader base of 10,000 subscribers, some of those subscribers might become future Substack writers. So that's like one type of creator growth loop. But it sounds like in this case, the growth loop is more that course instructors all talk to each other, they know other potential instructors, and their word of mouth drives referrals to the platform. So I'm curious on your thoughts about those 2 different models, like consumers as potential creators and then creators knowing other creators, and which one is more effective.
Yeah. And I think it almost is I almost don't want to be too prescriptive in the answer, because I think it sort of depends on who your eventual kind of market segment you're going after actually is. So for example, I could see a scenario where you use creators as a way to build awareness with businesses. And then eventually you're actually building, let's say, a sales process for those businesses, but you're actually using the creators as kind of a standing off point to get to acquiring businesses. So I think it sort of depends on what your goal is with the product that you're building. If you're using creators to get to consumers, I think you could take that approach. If you're using creators to get to other creators to get to consumers, I think that's another approach as well. But I think it almost depends on the context of the business itself. And I wouldn't sort of be too prescriptive about it, because I think it can vary based on the type of business.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. So, okay, so this is another point that I wanted to bring up here is the time and market. So, and actually what I mean by this is actually just timing the market. So one of the challenges that we had with Teachable was that, I think that we are still pretty early to market. If you think about kind of when it started, something like 7 years ago, you think about where the creator economy is now, you think about how much farther it can go, you're still pretty early. And so I think that when you're deciding on your beachhead and thinking about sort of the creator growth loop, I think the best place to be is where you're talking to an audience that's already aware of the problem. And they don't have to be educated about the problem. So with Teachable, what happened was we only had a limited set of people who knew about this idea of like teaching courses online and like making money. Like not a lot of people like understood that, because not a lot of people in the US consume information that way. It's still kind of like early days in the US, at least. It's maybe more familiar outside of the US, but in the US it's less familiar. And so we were kind of working against that problem. And so what we had to do at Teachable was spend a lot of time in this education step of educating people that they can actually make money online, that they can package their information into a course. And so that was pretty expensive for us to do something like that. And that really kind of, I think, was probably the biggest limiter of our growth, was just that the market was only a certain size and there's only a certain level of infrastructure and awareness and and things like that. That as opposed to what's going on with Circle. And I know that you guys are familiar with Circle, but Circle, a lot of people have already learned about the benefits of creating a community on Facebook, or learned about creating or the benefits of creating a community on a place like Discourse. So they are already educated about the problem, and they're already educated about the solution, and they don't like the solution. And so the level of product market fit that Circle has compared to Teachable is just dramatically more, because Circle is entering in at a time where all that kind of work and all that education work has already been done. Facebook's already done it for Circle, and Circle's now taking advantage of that. And so even though Circle right now has a really great growth team, and sort of the head of growth from Teachable that I hired is now the co-founder at Circle. Despite like him having that ability, Andrew, they have this kind of hidden ability to acquire lots of users, but they're not even using it, and they're growing extremely fast because they're doing this. And so, as you're thinking about your beachhead, it's also something I think I want to really like make you aware of, is like, where are you in terms of the market timing? Because if you're like Teachable, it's gonna be a harder journey. But if you're coming into a place where the market's already educated about the problem and alternative solutions that are not as good, that's a much, much better place to be. The last thing, before we kind of get into another Q&A and maybe the exercise, is the lag time between the different steps. So this is another challenge that we had at Teachable, was there tends to be a lag time between once you acquire a user, that user takes to create a new course. And so depending on your business and kind of who you're going after, you might have a lag time in each of these different steps. And so that's something that's worth thinking about at the very beginning, because in our case, our lag time is like 3 to 12 months. And that's a very, very long period of time when you might not be monetizing a user. And we figured out some ways to accelerate that. But at the end of the day, if you're able to figure this piece out, that also can really give you a much better creative growth loop. Cool. So
I think in the interest of time, we should go to the breakout.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's go to a breakout right now. And what we're all going to do is come up with our own growth loops. And what we're going to do is focus on, this is going to be a similar exercise to what Lee did with you guys. I think it was last week or the week before. But you guys are going to choose in your breakout group an example company. So maybe it's Linktree or Substack, or choose kind of a company of your own. And you're just going to go through this process. For the document link, I think, are we able to send out a link to everybody so they know?
Yep, it's in the Zoom chat now. And it's also in the Slack. Yes.
Perfect. So
we'll split you up into groups of 4 to 5. And remember, when you come back, to nominate a spokesperson to share your guys' growth loop.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Godspeed. Good luck.
All right.
Please click join.
Should I join group 6?
No, you should stay here.
Oh, yes.
Unless you want to do this exercise.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I'm fine. Yeah. So.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone again. Okay, so if you were the appointed chosen one for your room, please type your name into the chat or type hello into the chat. And we will, whoever is typing really loudly, please mute yourselves. All right, we'll call on some people. Conrad, do you want to call on someone?
Sure, if I can. I'm just not familiar with the setup.
Okay, it's in the Zoom chat.
It's in the Zoom chat.
Okay, let's start with, you can choose.
So let's do Zach from room 2.
Cool. So we actually just happened to land on an example of what I'm actually building. So in this case, we use Twitch as kind of our where we would be looking to get our niche from. So Twitch users with concurrent viewers of 10,000 or more, which I would consider to be like a pretty large Twitch creator. On the activate step, the high impact problem is commerce, getting these gaming creators into the commerce space and monetizing their audience through purchases that are already going to happen. In this case, selling games to their audience, not a game that they create, but the games that they're playing and they recommend. In our case, some of the things that we've used to attract these high impact or high word of mouth creators is custom rev share deals. So, we give them a bigger stake than we would smaller creators, with the goal of them earning really significant revenue through the platform, which is just going to make them more likely to talk about it and evangelize. And particularly in the gaming space, we've seen that these large content creators are really influencers of other influencers, and so we've seen success through that method.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's great. It's a really, if you're able to get that really, really big creator, there's just so much leverage there. It's more expensive, but kind of going back to that CAC LTV equation, it's like how, and especially if another platform takes that creator off platform. So you're sort of making that creator more sticky too. Interesting. Okay, so sorry.
No,
I was like thinking about that. It's okay. Let's go to I guess Drawer from room 4.
Or I think they voted for Thomas.
So Thomas in room 4.
Hey, Conrad. Great stuff so far. Appreciate it. Our group picked Substack. unanimously, I think. And for the niche, we said it could be Twitter users who post long threads that are followed by tons of people or read by a ton of folks, and allowing them to basically create an article or a newsletter automatically from that thread. So they're not doing additional work, but are now able to monetize off of a Twitter thread, or YouTubers or video creators who create videos where there's tons of talking and content that they show, and using video to text tools to easily allow them to create videos or articles from their videos and transition their voice to text and allow them to create newsletters automatically. And how to activate them, it would be, it would be these folks who you're allowing them to essentially kill two birds with one stone, and allowing them to continue doing what they do and then automatically create written text so they're not doing additional work and have that be monetizable. And then I think reference would just be these folks on Twitter who do write these long threads. Now, other people seeing that they're monetizing off their threads that they used to write for free might hop on, or YouTubers seeing that they've diversified a stream just by doing one thing might be appetized by it as well.
Yeah, just chiming in a little there, since I was at A16Z when we worked on Substack and was a board observer there. So the initial niche was actually, it really came through personal relationships. So one of the co-founders was a former journalist, had written a book, was a published author, had a wide network in the journalism world. And so the first few writers on Substack were actually just, handpicking people in his network who already had blogs with wide readership and moving that over to the Substack platform. And writers, I think, always want to establish a direct line of connection to their audiences. It's like you don't publish all that frequently, and so it's rare that people remember to check your blog. And so email was like a really great product for them and something that a lot of writers and bloggers already wanted, but it was just very challenging to figure out how to put it together on like MailChimp or some of the other email services. So they had great product market fit, plus like a founder who had a vast network into their initial target writers.
Cool. So should we just switch to the next? So we can do Paul for room 11.
Hey guys. Also random question, but with a name like Conrad, I have to ask. Conrad, are you Polish?
Yeah, 100%. I'm an immigrant. Yeah.
Mówisz po polsku?
Mówię.
Moja rodzina z Polski.
Bardzo dobrze.
I was like, Conrad? I mean, that's like a K, not a C.
I know. They're trying to Americanize me, so they put the C there. Yeah.
You can't fool me.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Sorry to do that. Yeah.
We did Patreon, and I was actually just looking it up, the sort of founding story, because I'm not super familiar with it, but the niche is YouTube creators, but I guess you could I'm sure maybe someone in the chat can come up with a better kind of niche. I guess Jack Conte was a YouTube creator, and he started the business because he wanted to make money off of his YouTube followership. So the activation is obviously monetizing, creators monetizing passionate audience through membership-based platform with exclusive content and community. And there's two-part referral. Obviously, one is to get audiences to sign up, so mentioning it obviously in their YouTube videos, basically any channels that the creators can advertise themselves on, or where they're being followed, links in social media, and then obviously through doing that, Pamplemousse, and then catalyzing additional creator awareness for Patreon. So obviously other creators all watch each other, and then at some point they've introduced a referral program for creators to refer other fellow creators, and then when it comes to acquisition, portion of the selection of the creator's audience will obviously convert to become paying subscribers or patrons, and then some percentage of the referred creators will sign up for Patreon as well. So pretty simple execution from team 11.
Nice. Well done.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's so interesting how the product kind of Patreon has been based around YouTube. Because the initial kind of segment that you choose, the product ends up being extremely optimized for that segment. I haven't seen Patreon also expand to other platforms either. There's no like sort of Twitch, or maybe there is, I don't know, but I haven't seen it. Twitch users going on Patreon, for example, or something like that. Kind of interesting to see.
And there's something interesting about the brand also, like around Patreon, because YouTube launched like memberships and like a year or two ago, and but Patreon still has like a very distinct brand, and there's kind of like a subset of creators on YouTube who are like, they're like Patreon or die, and they have that like awesome community, and there's a lot to be said about. And I know one of the pre-reading articles was about brand and positioning, and it just kind of reinforces that what Patreon was able to do.
Yeah, I think the initial focus on YouTube has been both a strength and a liability for them, because it does work really well for YouTubers. I think that's still the major segment there, but there's also other segments of creators on the internet for whom Patreon doesn't work super well, like anyone who's not distributing content or some sort of digital media. Like there's also more verticalized competitors popping up, like Substack. If you're a Substack writer and you have a subscription, there's no need for Patreon on top of that. Same with Twitch. So yeah, I think that's both the limitation as well as the strength of its initial beachhead. And now with 2 minutes left,
oh shit, okay.
Shall we proceed?
Okay, sorry, so that's my bad. So let's see, so I think Gil for 16.
Hello. All right. So Linktree, for the niche, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Creators that have a significant following of other creators and exist on multiple platforms. So the thing is it could be Casey and Neistat, could be Colin and Samir, could be Lee. Yeah. The activation, we feel like our selling point is that we make it easier for creators to cross-pollinate their audiences among different platforms. By giving them a central directory that can include their social profiles, their merch, affiliate links. It's also a solution to fans Googling you and getting sent somewhere that you don't want. Linktree lets you direct them. The refer thing is great because they put their link in their bio and it's got your brand name right in it. So, I mean, you're in the most precious real estate of a profile and your brand name is there. And you didn't pay for that placement. Acquire, we would say, on every Linktree page, there's a button that says create your own free Linktree, and that'll just generate more signups. In terms of like a recommended adjustment, maybe if you created like a paid affiliate program, it might spur creators to promote their Linktree like in actual posts instead of just leaving it in their bio. And like maybe they get a rev share of like premium signups or something. But yeah, that's what our group came up with for Linktree.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I think Linktree has an amazing creator growth loop. The thing it may not have, which I'll cover next week when I'm back here next Tuesday, is like the depth of product value that it offers the creators. How business critical is it? How defensible is it? How much depth is there really in the creator's life? So that's another dimension that we're obviously not talking about today because today is all about distribution and growth. But that's a whole other realm of consideration for investors and for company builders.
That's a great point you bring up, and really good transition to maybe the next workshop. It's almost like that their activation is not like high impact activation. It's just kind of like low impact. And so when you have low impact activation, then what's the defensibility?
Yeah. Great. Is there anything else in here that we should cover that you have in the remaining slides?
So I'll just say one thing is that 20 to 30 meetings a week is doable. So this is me
with creators.
With creators. And, this is me, I think this is 2 weeks ago or this is kind of like my schedule. And even though I sort of know creators in general, I'm still setting up meetings with them and I'm still talking to them. and I'm going over the product and I'm understanding what their problems are. And to the point where I can almost predict what they're going to tell me. That's almost the point that you want to be with the persona and the niche that you choose. So you want to know them, you want to almost become their friends, you want to build a real empathy for them. And I think one of the only ways to do that is to set up this many meetings. It's possible to do 20 to 30 pretty consistently. They're very easy to reach out to. This is kind of an example that you can kind of very quickly see. There's a nice like outreach stack that I use, and I now actually have somebody implementing for me, of going on Upwork, using Apollo.io, Calendly, and email, and you can just create a process around reaching out to them in a very authentic way, and then setting up meetings directly. So one thing that I can do is that if you want some of these like specific documents, maybe I can put them into Slack, so you can kind of just look at some of these tools. But if there is kind of like one takeaway from today, it's kind of like creator growth loop, like come up with it before you do too much stuff, because it can save you a year plus of time. And then just set up 20 meetings in your calendar and just do it like however you can. Figure out how to do it, because your product is going to be different. It's going to be significantly better, and you're going to be much more in tune with who you're building for.